I'm here today to explain how you can quit binge eating without slipping into trying to have perfect eating or trying to be overly restrictive with food, which can actually work against you in binge eating recovery. I'm Kathryn Hansen. I'm the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, and I also host the Brain Over Binge podcast. Welcome to my YouTube channel where you'll learn practical, no-nonsense information about how to stop feeling so out of control around food. To help you along the way, you can get my free 31-day inspiration booklet, which will help you with focusing on recovery and staying motivated as you implement the concepts that you're learning here. And you can get that inspiration booklet through a link in the show description. So when you're trying to stop binge eating, you're really trying to stop these episodes where you're eating a massive amount of food, where you're making yourself sick with the quantity of food you're eating and even the types of food that you're eating. You're trying to stop these really out of control behaviors where you feel like you're eating in a way that's just so out of line with how you want to be eating and the way of eating that makes you feel good. Stopping binge eating doesn't mean that you'll avoid all overeating. It doesn't mean that you'll say no to all junk foods. I think what some people can get confused about my approach is they think that dismissing urges to binge means dismissing urges to eat in any way that's not ideal. But that's actually not the case. Stopping binge eating means you're stopping binge eating. And when people start to get into the mindset that stopping that behavior means they're stopping all eating behaviors that they deem imperfect, that can be a slippery slope back into harmful dieting behaviors, which really prevents recovery from binging. And I want to explain how I think this happens and then how you can prevent that from happening in your own recovery. If you're familiar with the brain over binge approach, you know that I teach to dismiss urges to binge, which come from the lower brain. And that's the primitive part of your brain that's in charge of your survival, that's in charge of your pleasure, and that's in charge of maintaining habits like binging. When you dismiss the urges to binge, you're really separating your higher self or your higher brain from those primal drives and impulses. When you have urges to binge, you learn to realize that those urges are what I call neurological junk. They're not you. They don't represent your true wants and needs. They don't deserve your attention. And you can just observe them and learn not to act on them. And in this way, the brain deconditions the habit. In a well-known concept called neuroplasticity, the brain can change itself. It learns that you no longer need the habit and it stops producing those urges. Now, when we think about stopping acting on urges for a harmful behavior, it's really clear when you think of a behavior like smoking that you don't actually need for your survival. So any urge to smoke, you can think of that as an urge from that primal part of your brain, and you can dismiss it and not act on it. And therefore, the urge to smoke will go away. And anyone who's ever quit a habit like smoking knows this. Now, with eating, it becomes a little more tricky because you have to eat every day to survive. And we have a lot of urges to eat and desires to eat that are perfectly normal. So people who are using this approach to stop binge eating sometimes get confused about what urges to dismiss. They may start to wonder if they should be dismissing urges for all junk food or all sugar or all food when they're not hungry or all carbohydrates. It just can become a slippery slope into thinking that they need to dismiss more urges than they actually need to dismiss in order to quit the binge eating habit. And then when you dismiss too many urges, it can start to feel like restrictive dieting when you're telling yourself no too much when it comes to eating, when you're not really deriving much pleasure in food because you think food should only be fuel and you only can eat when you're hungry and you can only eat perfectly healthy foods and you have to dismiss the desires for anything beyond that. But that's definitely not the intention of the brain over binge approach. I want you to be able to eat abundantly. I want you to nourish yourself well. I want you to enjoy food. I want you to be able to have food in social situations. I want you to be able to enjoy dessert. I mean, I realize that some people have medical issues, that there are certain foods that they can't eat, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm talking about in this video. When I refer to the lower brain and the higher brain, I'm not saying the lower brain is your unhealthy eating brain or your imperfect eating brain. And then I'm also not saying that the higher brain is your perfect eating brain or your healthy eating brain. It's really much more nuanced than this. When there's not restrictive dieting going on and when there's not binging going on, your lower brain and your higher brain kind of work together when it comes to eating. You want your lower brain to have a job and a role in eating. It's very important in our appetite regulation and in the pleasure we derive from food. When you stop binging, you're just trying to get rid of this glitch that's in your lower brain. This glitch that's really making you feel like massive amounts of food are necessary for your survival. And that glitch that's sending out these strong urges for you to eat in a way that you know is ultimately very, very harmful to you. Once this glitch is deconditioned, your lower brain can return to the role of driving you toward normal amounts of food for pleasure and for nourishment and for sustaining your body. And that normal drive for food that the lower brain has a big role in will never be perfect. In the food environment that we live in, we're not just going to feel driven toward only the perfect foods at only the perfect times. And that's why we have a higher brain as well. We can always decide what impulses and what cravings we want to follow and which ones maybe aren't serving us. And this all can create a really nice balance where you are following some food cravings just for pleasure and you're enjoying that without going overboard. And then sometimes you're using your higher brain to steer yourself in a more nourishing direction. And that balance is really what you're aiming for, because if food becomes too much of a rational experience when you're trying to exert too much of that higher brain control, it can end up feeling like a restrictive diet. And some people do take this concept of dismissing urges too far so that they're trying to dismiss any urge to eat a food that's not in line with their strict diet plan. As an example, if someone is trying to maintain a calorie deficit, they may start to try to dismiss urges to eat any food that takes them beyond that calorie number. And this is definitely the opposite of the intent of the brain over binge approach. The brain over binge approach is never to be used to dismiss urges to eat food that you actually need. It's also not a way to become overly rigid with food or to create a lot of food rules for yourself. It's about stopping the binge eating habit. And sometimes when you're trying to stop that habit, you need to take a look at what do you actually consider binging? Because eating something that's not healthy is not binging. Eating sugar in normal amounts is not binging. Eating dessert is not binging. Eating fast food is not binging. Unless, of course, you're binging on these things. When you start to lump all of these behaviors that may not be ideal in your mind together with binging, it can create a lot of confusion and it can really cause you to overuse the strategy of dismissing urges. It can make you feel like you're doing something wrong if you have a dessert or if you have fast food, when in reality, all you did was have a dessert or have fast food, and it doesn't have to affect your recovery. I think what can often happen is people may follow a more pleasure-driven desire for food, let's say for dessert. They'll have the dessert and think, oh, I've already failed, I've already followed my lower brain, and I might as well binge. But following your lower brain or following that desire for pleasure isn't always a bad thing. Again, it's returning the lower brain to the role of regulating your eating in a normal way and getting normal amounts of pleasure from food. And everyone has to find that balance for themselves as far as what desires to follow and what desires should be better served not to. But you're always better served not to follow the urge to binge. I hope this video has helped you understand how to stop binge eating and how to avoid taking the strategy of dismissing urges too far, because the brain over binge approach does not work unless you're eating enough. And when you start over dismissing or dismissing too many urges to eat food that you actually need, you keep yourself in that food deprived state that really perpetuates the binge eating habit. If you want more help, I want to encourage you to check out the video description. There you'll find links to my 2 books. You can get that free inspiration booklet. You can learn about one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and my online course. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope to see you in the next video.